Well, hello again, Facebook and YouTube, whoever else is watching out there on social media as we continue with our next 20 minutes in the Word Bible study from St. John Lutheran Church here in Luxembourg, Wisconsin. And hopefully you're getting something out of this. Hopefully this is challenging you because that's really what I'm trying to do with this Bible study as we dive into First Corinthians and are challenged with situations that were not just in Paul's day, not long after Christ had left, ascended into heaven, as Paul has been a big part in founding this church in Corinth, not really Paul himself. The Lord worked through Paul, just like he worked through Apollos and Peter and others. But Paul has a special connection with this church, and this church is struggling. And so Paul's writing to them, trying to help them to weather through the storm that they're in right now. And so that's what we're going to be studying today. We're going to be talking specifically about 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and we're only going to do 3 verses because there's a lot to talk about just in these 3 verses. If you remember from Monday, we talked about not only lawsuits among believers and Paul's encouragement against that. But we also talked about staying away from these habitual sins, fleeing from sin, fleeing from things that are going to ensnare us and become a habit, become part of our daily life. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is whoever you're doing the Bible study with, if it's family, if it's friends, if it's 1 or 2 people, if it's 10, whoever it is, or if it's even by yourself, pause the video right now and read 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 12 through 14. You can read beyond that, and you can read the whole chapter if you want as a refresher, but we're going to focus specifically on these 3 verses today. So read that at this time. All right, so you had a chance to read that. And hopefully what you're starting to see here is Paul's talking about what is called Christian freedom. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be enslaved by anything. So this is verse 12. So the question I want you to read right now or think about, and I've given you actually some additional places to look for concepts on this, and I'll explain some other places as well. The question is, what principles of Christian freedom is Paul talking about in these 3 verses? So you can read ahead to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23, and around there he unpacks this Christian freedom thing a little bit more there. You can go to the book of Romans and read chapter 14. Really, you can even look at other places, such as like Mark chapter 2, verse 23, or Matthew 15, verse 17, Colossians 2, verse 22. There's other places where Jesus and Paul are specifically talking about food freedoms from the old dietary code that God had required. But that kind of plays into this greater concept of Christian freedom. So again, if you want to pause the video and talk about that, and then we'll unpack it some more together. Well, Christian freedom is basically this concept, again, that he talks about. All things are possible, but not all things are helpful. So let me unpack that. When Jesus died on the cross, he died for every single sin we will ever commit. We've ever committed in the past, we're committing today, and we will commit in the future. All of them. They're all gone. All paid for. We have totally been set free, in one sense, from the law of God, because we're no longer under it. We're under the grace of Christ. So, in essence, we could do whatever we wanted. It's all forgiven. But if we give ourselves over to sin again, if we become enslaved by sin again, that's dangerous. Because sin doesn't, our sinful pride, that's where I'm going to go the best with this. Our sinful pride wants to convince us we don't need him. It's like when you're in a relationship and there's problems in the relationship. We try to convince ourselves, oh, we don't need this person. It's not until that person's gone that we truly see that we did need them. that a big chunk of our life is gone. And so that's the idea of Christian freedom. We're free to do whatever. We're set free from the law of God. Jesus himself put this into context in terms of the dietary codes. You know, the people weren't supposed to eat pork. The people weren't supposed to eat things with blood in it, cooked in the blood of its parent or its own blood, or the milk of its parent. There we go. There were all these different dietary codes of what was good to eat and kosher, if you will, and not kosher. Well, Jesus does away with that. Jesus says no. God made all of this. I mean, he gives Peter a vision, for instance, in the book of Acts, saying that, you know, eat. The sheet comes down with all these animals on it that were things that they weren't supposed to eat, and God says, eat up. I didn't make anything that was unclean. So God changed the rules through Jesus. That all of those rules in the Old Testament were meant to point people to Jesus, point people to God, were meant to set the people apart so that people would want to know why. Why do you live this way? Why do you not eat these things? Well, that's an example to tell them about God, tell them about Jesus in the future. But that's gone now because Jesus came. And this is what we use to point people to God today. So all things are lawful. We can do all things that we want, but it's not just going to not be helpful for us. It could potentially hurt our faith. But what about our neighbor? And that's really what Paul's getting at in Romans chapter 14. What about our neighbor? What's the impact that the choices of my life are going to have on my neighbor? So as a pastor, you know, if I went out and robbed a bank, and it was in the news tomorrow. You've been watching these segments. Maybe you're a member of my church, or the congregation I serve, or maybe you're not. And suddenly now your faith is called into question because of my choices. If I go out and I sleep around on my wife, not only is it going to have an impact on me, it's going to have an impact on my wife, it's going to have an impact on my children, and it's ultimately going to have an impact on you. Because you're going to wonder, what the heck is this guy doing? How can I listen to anything he's been telling me? And you're going to question this. So, again, trying to put this concept of Christian freedom. We have been set free from God's law. We observe God's law out of love for our neighbors and out of love even for Christ. Because he was willing to do this for me. I don't want to do those things. I want to try to do what's going to give him glory. Try is the key word here. We fight. And we'll come to that more in our third question today. All right, so our next question, and this is going to deal specifically, or more specifically, I should say, with verse 13, the latter part of verse 13. So let me put it up here on the screen for us. What is the effect of sin on our bodies, as talked about in the latter part of verse 13? So pause the video and talk about that. Well, as it says here, the body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. So God made us in a certain way. One of the things that we see with God's commandments throughout the Bible, his laws, his rules, if you will, is those rules are really meant for our well-being. So, you know, just talking with kids in a basic way, what's the consequence of going around having sex with everybody and their brother? Well, you could get sexually transmitted diseases. You could mess up your body. You could get pregnant out of wedlock. You know, all these are potential consequences. What about the mental, the emotional consequences? You know, easy statistic that's out there. For every partner, sexual partner that a person has prior to marriage, the likelihood of them getting a divorce goes up 10%. Just statistically. You know, and again, I'm not trying to harp on sex things here. I'm not trying to like wallop you with guilt. I'm just trying to help you understand there is a emotional, physical, mental consequence to our sins, not just for us, but for other people. Our neighbors, our loved ones, ourselves. There's a consequence to sin. And so that's why God's encouraging us through Paul here. Hey, look beyond the immediate right now. Look beyond what you think you absolutely need, what's going to make you feel good right now, and think about not only Him, but think about the people around you. Even at the very least, think about yourself and what the consequence could be of this choice you're about to make, this temptation that you're being tempted with. Now, having said that, and this is where we're trying to balance law and gospel, okay? We battle with sin every day. We will sin. That doesn't mean we just use that as an excuse to go and give up the battle. No, we keep fighting. We keep trying to do the right thing. We keep coming, though, back to the foot of the cross and begging, Lord, please forgive me, for I have sinned, wretched man that I am. Those are the words of Paul himself. All right, next question. How does Paul seek to motivate a change in behavior in verse 14? And this is going to be key for us as Christians, because this is very different than what we typically do. Okay, so let's pause the video and talk about how does Paul seek to motivate a change in behavior in verse 14. Well, typically when we try to motivate people to change behavior as parents, we think of punishment, negative consequences. So don't do that, or I'm going to take something away. Don't do that, or I'm going to spank you. Don't talk to me like that, or you're going to lose your phone. That seems to be the number one way to deal with our teenagers today, right? Well, the way God works to motivate and to motivate change is to point us again to what He's done to change us. He doesn't beat us over the head necessarily with judgment. He beats us over the head with, look at what I did for you. And He doesn't beat us with it. He actually wraps His arms around us and says, I love you so much. Look at what I've done for you. God raised the Lord and will raise us up by His power. So Paul is being used by the Holy Spirit to keep pointing us to the future, pointing us to heaven, pointing us to what's our goal for our life now that we've been transformed by Jesus. It's not just for us to be in heaven. It's for our family and our friends and even the strangers that we meet on the street, that they would be in heaven eternally with us. So that's how He's encouraging a change, by pointing us what's our purpose in life again. Because if something's happening in our life, if something's starting to become a habit, if something's starting to become part of our pattern, if something's starting to take control of us, enslave us, it's either going to point people to Jesus or it's going to point them away. And so much of sin will always point away. So Paul's being used by God to say, let us live to point people here. That's the 20 minutes in the Word for today. Keep doing your gratitude journals. Keep finding ways for God. Pray every morning, Lord, this whole day's ahead of me. Defend me from Satan this day. Help me to be used by you. If you don't know how to pray that, I'd encourage you to look up Martin Luther's morning prayer. It's a great resource out there. Great prayer to pray in the morning as you're getting out of bed. Maybe you're brushing your teeth, whatever. And it really focuses not only on God defending us from the devil, but also using us in our daily life. There's many other prayers that you can pray as well, but that's just one that comes to mind. So, okay, everybody, talk to you next week in our next 20 Minutes in the Word segment.